Longfield. I am the General Manager of Auckland Generator. On behalf of Generator, I just wanted to say welcome to you all. It's awesome to have you here. Unfortunately, our CEO Ryan Wilson couldn't be with us tonight, so he sends his apologies. But thanks for being here. It's a very exciting opportunity for us. We're really looking forward to the Generator project, and we're really honoured to have it housed within Generator. It's an exciting collaboration between education and the business world, essentially. We're looking forward to seeing what your students can come up with, seeing if you can redesign the way shared workspaces work, and hopefully we can steal some of your ideas. So adopt your ideas. Welcome, David. It's wonderful to have you here, and we're really excited to hear what you've got to say. And thank you, Mark and Hamish and the Unitec team. You've put a lot of work into this, and it's exciting for us, and we thank you for all of that hard work. So enjoy, everybody, and yeah, thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Francesca. Okay, so just a quick little bit of housekeeping and an overview of process for the evening. There are loos just outside, just through this door on both sides. And in terms of process, what I'll do is get Dr. Rick Eade, who's the Chief Executive of Unitec, just to say a few words about Unitec and some of the sort of thoughts and plans for the future, as well as this project. And we'll then hand over to David to do his presentation. So David's presentation, I understand, will run for around an hour. So if you do need to duck out and use the loos, just straight out through the doors, no problem with that. And then we'll have a couple of questions thereafter. And David does need to leave in a taxi, I think 7:20. So we'll close the questions and just move through for another few drinks at the end of the presentation, where you can have some informal conversation and ask any other questions that you'd like to then. Right, so without any further commentary from me, I'll hand over to Rick just to give a little bit of overview in terms of what this is all about.
Thanks, Mike. Kia ora, everybody, and as Mike said, I'm Rick Eade, Unitec's Chief Executive. I'm really excited about what's happening here because it's an example of what, as an organisation, we're trying to do to completely rethink the world of education for learning. Education for employment, I should say. Education for employment. That is, it's about recognising that we're as a society and as an industry, if you like, from an education perspective, we're actually rapidly approaching some tipping point situations. And in the world of education, there's a huge driving impact from the role of technology. If we think about the education, be it at school, tertiary, it's almost one of the last industries in the world that has resisted transformation by the role of technology. And that wave is coming. If we think about the expectations on us as an organisation from society and from our learners, it's about, so just keep on reminding us again, what's the value you add? What's the value for students, for learners? What's the value for industry? What's the value for the community? And when you start asking yourself those questions, you quite rapidly start to hone in and say, what are the things we do that actually do make a difference, and what are some of the things we do which actually others can do better? And one of the things that we do that can make a difference is actually to set our students, our graduates, up for employment and for a good career. And by actually working in ways that connect the learning experience to the working experience far earlier on, and actually stop thinking about our students as students, but maybe think about our students as actually early career professionals from day one. And if we thought about them as that context, what would we be doing about enhancing not just the technical skills and knowledge that they acquire along the way, but actually make the world of work completely real from the start, then we would actually, I think, look to be in the future a very different organisation. I know that that's exactly what is going to happen. And to do that, we need to learn some new ways of working. And this project with the generator is a really great example of learning some new ways of working. It's about actually trying to set up the sort of learning environment that actually would be and the sort of experience that could easily be something that would be encountered in the workforce from day one. That is, we have a real life client with a very innovative business, a generator, thinking of themselves about how do we reinvent shared working spaces for the future. That's going to require some really creative thinking. Well, just so happens that Unitec has a whole lot of incredibly creative and talented learners and staff who, if we brought them together in some interesting combinations that aren't just around design or architecture or computing or business, but actually put them all into one room, into one space, the space that they'll be actually working to design, and saying, go to it guys, let those ideas or those worlds collide and let's see what gets created from that. And then how do we take that and turn that into a commercially viable proposition, something that can be actually put into practice by the client, with good supervision from industry professionals and the client involvement the whole way along. You know, that starts to feel like something that you know, any business would be working through as they were looking to think new thoughts and develop new business opportunities. So from my perspective, this is an amazing opportunity for hopefully for students, that it's a real project, a real client, and the stuff you guys generate will, I'm incredibly confident will actually end up in application. Hopefully that will have some good brownie points to go onto the CVs, and that we get a client who, in the generator, who actually creates some new opportunities as a business to put its next generation of space into practice. So I just think this is what a good one should look like. And from my perspective at Unitec, what we're trying to do is to set up a whole lot of different versions of these experiments, so to speak, and then put them into practice and then monitor them and see how they go. Did they work? Did that add something to the learning experience? Did that make our students more employable, our graduates more employable, our early career professionals more employable? From my perspective, at the end of the day, if we can't point to that outcome, and go back to that fundamental question, why do we exist, we haven't yet got a very good answer. So, guys, I hope you have a fantastic project. I hope that it's stimulating, provocative, bloody hard work, and a bit of good fun at the same time. So, which is what I hope life should be about. So that's it from me. Just thanks everybody for coming along. Thanks for the team of professionals who are working with the students. Thanks. I hope the clients and the occupants here at the generator get something out of this as well, and there's a bit of interactive spark goes on between you all. That was actually one of the reasons why the generator was put into play in the first place, and hopefully this will help that along. So thanks everyone. All the best.
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Francesca, Generator, for inviting me, and thank you all for coming. Just a thought on those notebooks. I was asked to do one of those quick email surveys for a newspaper because it's been doing Book Week. What was your favourite book? An empty notebook with lots of blank pages, full of potential. I'll explain this time as we go on. Mark asked me to talk. Can you put that down a bit so you can just see the pictures?
Is that right?
Mark asked me to talk about making spaces work better collaboratively. How do you make spaces feel better, the spaces we live in? I'm going to talk about the creative process that's behind that. You can then apply that to doing just that. This is more about the creative process, which inevitably will make those spaces work better and us collaborate more and feel better within them. But rather than talking about that, I'm talking about the creative process itself. I like to tell stories, and stories are a part of a lot of what I do. So I'm going to tell you a story to start this off. A story that actually is the story of the beginning. It's the Maori creation myth. And initially, right at the start of everything, there was te kore, the nothingness. And within that empty space, there was not even blackness, it was just empty, and it went on forever and ever and ever. It just had potential and no more. Then came te po, the darkness. And te po lasted for a long, long, long time, for an eternity as well. But it was dark now. We had this blackness, we had form within the emptiness, more potential. Thank you. And then the sun and the moon appeared into this. And out of this potential, out of this emptiness, Ranginui and Papatuanuku appeared. They were formed. The sky god and the earth mother. And they were locked together in a tight embrace. And their children were trapped inside, in between them, in the darkness. And they couldn't see out. And they were suffocating. They didn't like this. And they said, it's dark, we want to see out. And they argued about how to push their parents apart. Some wanted to kill them, some wanted to force them apart. And they eventually decided to force them apart. And they tried, and several people tried and couldn't do it. Eventually Tane got down on his back, and his shoulders buried in the earth, in Papatuanuku, the earth mother. He pushed his feet against Ranginui and pushed him up into the sky. And so Tane became the god of the forest, which held up the sky. And then at that point, light started to come in. And in this new world, as they looked around them, they knew nothing. They had no knowledge of what to do or how to live. And so they argued amongst themselves, and Tane, who sort of been behind all this, was sent up into the heavens to talk to Io, the great god who'd been there forever. And he eventually, through a lot of adversity and a whole lot of stories, got there and said to Io, said, look, thank you, we love this place, but what's the deal? How do we do it? We don't know nothing. Okay, yeah, right, sorry, we kind of slipped up there. Here's the knowledge you need to live on Earth in 3 baskets, in 3 kete. And there they are. And this is my interpretation of them. And you say, well, why turn baskets of knowledge into lights? Well, knowledge is light. So it's a perfect solution. And as just as a sideline to this sort of design process, if I said to you, design a light, why? What? Who? What would you do? You don't know where to start. And you come up with something sort of derivative, and you hop on something that's been done before, and you wouldn't really know where to start. If I tell a story, and you illustrate the story, you've got the story of these 3 baskets, instantly you've got a form of the light. And there's a reason for the form. You've got a basket. It's absolutely perfect. So telling stories is a wonderful way to sort of lead you into not just designing something for the sake of it, but there's a reason behind it. You're telling a story. They're part of our culture. They have a reason, they have a moral. So this story of the 3 kete is also about balance. And that's also really important. And I'll explain that. The 3 baskets. Kete Aranui is a basket of which contains the knowledge of the natural world, of the forests, of the oceans, of the food, of the materials we can get from the land, and of our bodies, which are a part of that. And so I made that out of wood, a natural material. The second one, Kete Ta'auri, is our rational knowledge that we have up here. It's made from aluminium. It's sharp and crystalline and jagged and straight lines and precise. And the third one is Kete Ta'auri, which contains our spiritual knowledge, which is more nebulous, more light, more delicate, more airy. And the moral that I took from this is that in the Maori world, those 3, which we would call body, mind, and spirit in that order, are in balance. And to live harmoniously on the world, they need to be balanced. Currently, they're not. This guy, Keti Ari, our rational knowledge, is drowning out a connection to the natural world and drowning out a connection to the spiritual world. And that is why, one of the reasons why we've got a lot of problems in our world today. It's dominated by Keti Ari. Why? It's all up here. It's all happens. It comes from up here. And I'll illustrate that with a sheep story. Not because we're in New Zealand, but because and actually the sheep comes from Iceland, so it's a different sheep to what we used to see here. A long time ago, sheep were wild and they roamed on the grass and the moors and the fells and the heather, just eating where and how they pleased. And as they grew in numbers, they became more focused in their grazing, and they started to create tracks on the land. They started to follow these tracks as they grazed, one behind the other, until one day they came to a fence. Now a sheep only knows how to go forward. So when it gets to the fence, it just gets locked and it keeps pushing, and the more it pushes, the more it gets tangled, the more it can't get out. Now if that stupid bugger knew that all he had to do was stop and look around, there's a hole over there. Well, actually, the grass over here is perfectly good. You don't need to go to the other side at all. But you can only think in this straight line. And that is us now, here, today, in this world. We've got into this society, this culture, this world of living that only knows how to go forward. It doesn't know how to stop, disengage, and look around it and take in the bigger picture. Why? It's all up here. And it's explained in this amazing book that I read a few years ago, by Ian McGilchrist, called The Master and His Emissary. It took him 20 years to write. It's in two parts. In the first part, he's a psychiatrist and also with a lot of knowledge about neuroscience. And he took thousands and thousands of research projects that looked into the brain and how the brain works to understand this problem or this division of the brain, these two hemispheres which occupy our skulls. We have two separate brains, and if we lost one of them, we could live perfectly right with the other. That's an incredible investment, both in evolution and in our living now today, to put all the energy to two brains. Why? No one really knows, but they work quite differently. And this is what he's discovered in his research. So the first half of the book explains this difference, this what he called the divided brain. The second half then looks at culture through the ages for the last 2,000 or 3,000 years and shows how the brain has affected the cycles of culture through left and right brain influence. And it's quite clear and distinct, and brings it up to the current day and shows us how it's affecting us now. The book is called The Master and His Emissary because it's based on another story, another metaphor by Nietzsche, called The Master and His Emissary. About a king who lives in a kingdom a number of years ago, which was very prosperous, and he was a good king, and he looked after his people, and he talked to them every day, and they knew him, and because they knew him, he came around, they were happy, and so it was prosperous. And so it grew, and the numbers grew, to the point where he couldn't get around every day to meet all the people. So he employed an emissary to do it for him. And as time went on, the emissary realized that the people only saw him, not the master. And he started to usurp the role of master, because they thought he was the master, the king. And so he took over that role, and in everybody's minds he was the king. Now this is what McGilchrist is saying is happening in our brains. The right brain is the master, the left brain is the emissary, and it's taking over power. So to explain exactly what's happening, we have these two hemispheres, which he calls the divided brain. And traditionally, we've had this sort of through pop culture, we've had this sort of understanding that the right brain is intuitive and the left brain is rational, and one's good and one's bad, depending on which side of the fence you come from. Well, it's not actually quite like that. It's far, far more complex than that. And they've actually evolved to work together. These differences, and I'll put it out of the way so you can see them. The right hemisphere is outward looking and connected. It's like a fuzzy sphere. It kind of reaches out and connects to all that's around it. Whereas the left hemisphere is inward looking and sees only itself and what it contains within itself. The right is implicit. It understands things in place, whereas the left takes things out of place explicitly and can examine them. The right is spherical, whereas the left is linear. The right is intuitive because it's connected, because it's feeling, whereas the left is rational and scientific. The right sees things in context, the implicit nature of things, whereas the left takes things out of context totally and analyzes them in a decontextualized way. And so the right understands in between this, the relation between things, rather than the things themselves, which is what the left understands, in an abstract, disembodied way. Those stories I told you about the master and the sheep are metaphors. You understood that in your right brain. The left only heard a story of a sheep and saw nothing in between it. Most importantly, the empathy lies within the right. Whereas the left is self-referential. It has no connection to the outside. It sees everything within itself. The right likes uncertainty because uncertainty is growth, it's potential, whereas the left hates uncertainty. Wants everything clear and familiar. There are seats here if you want to sit down.
Apologies for that.
That's all right. There are more differences. The right engages with people, it cares about people because it feels, because it empathy, whereas the left engages with machines and controls things. The right gathers information, it sees things which are new, whereas the left only knows what it already knows. It knows nothing new, it is separate, it is isolated, self-contained. The right reads meaning and gesture in people's faces through its empathy, through its connection. Whereas the left controls form and hears words, but doesn't understand that implicit meaning. The French have a way of describing this, which is interesting we don't have in the Anglo-Saxon word. We have one word for know. The French, the Roman languages have two. In French is connaître and savoir. If I know a person, if I know you, je le connais. Or je te connais, I know you. It's a sort of empathy, a feeling. That's the right brain process. If I know how to use a machine, it's je sais conduire, I know how to drive. Two different words, which are summing up those two different interactions you have either with the left or the right brain. And as McGilchrist describes it, way back in our history of evolution, when we first came out of the trees, and we were, even before then, when we were living as primitive apes, if you like, we would go through this three-part process using our brains. We would be out there feeding, we'd be looking at the ground below us. Is this root something I can eat? Or is it a bit of twig I can't eat? So it's looking at it closely, analysing it, a left brain process. At the same time, its right brain is connected with everything around it, in tune with the environment, because if there's a predator there, instead of you having lunch, you will be lunch. So you need to avoid that. So the right brain is connected while the left brain is analysing. So if a threat appears on the horizon, you perceive that through your spherical connection to your right brain, you will immediately go over to it, disconnect, just take it out of the context, pass it over to the left brain, which will analyse it. Is this a threat? Is this pattern familiar with a tiger or a lion, which we've seen before? If so, is it a threat where it is now? Placing it back in context, back into the right brain. So there's a three-part process. Right brain connection, left brain decontextualized analysis, right brain back in context, yes or no, is it a threat? And that three-part process is still continued up to now, but the problem is the left brain is thinking that it knows all the answers. Because it knows nothing new, because it sees everything within its own hall of mirrors, it thinks, well, I know the answer. I don't need to hand it back. Stuff you, I'm going to go my own way. And that's what's happening with us now. So leaving that just to one side for the moment, we can think about that on that one. I want to talk about creativity, the creative process as I've come to understand it. we've kind of lived in this world, this left-brain dominated world, which likes to control and decontextualize and analyze things and call art one thing and craft another and design another, and they're over the ghettos as objects, as separate things. But they're not. They're part of a continuous process. I don't even see them as nouns, as things, as people. They're verbs. They're things you do. And that they're individual parts of one creative process. And everything we do in the creative world has to use all these three. And there's no point you can draw a line and say this is design purple, this is art blue, because there's no point we can see blue on one side and purple on the other. It's this continuum that goes right the way through. And throughout our history, we have used those three together in balance. Perfect example would be a Michelangelo painting. He was a consummate craftsman. These paintings survived on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel for 400 or 500 years because he took a lot of care to prepare the gesso, the plaster, build up his browns, mix his pigments so that they would last. These incredible colours now, hundreds of years later. And he probably made his own brushes and everything else as well. So he had to be a superb craftsman for this to be like it is now. He was an artist in his understanding of the human body, the human culture, the stories he was telling, the way in which he kind of changed our thinking about our culture through telling these stories in a slightly different way, through depicting the human form in the way that he did, changed our understanding of humans in history and in culture. And then as a designer, he's realized his concept, his ideas, in this powerful layout of these figures with these almost touching fingers that don't quite touch. That's an incredibly sort of pregnant moment in the middle there where life is about to jump across in that spot. That's the design, that's the layout, that's the composition which he's gone through to create that. So everything we do goes through these three parts of the process. And if we do them all three, we're using the full creative process. And if we're not, then I think we're in trouble again. And I'll explain a little bit more how those processes work. Probably many of you are familiar with the famous Mondrian process of abstraction. He started directly observing trees, doing very observational paintings of trees. Then he would gradually, over a period of time, a number of years, he slowly refined those trees, abstracted them, turned the pattern of the tree into a more geometric form until he created what we know now as a Mondrian painting. Now, he didn't just go and do that. That came out of this. Now that is the art process working. He's going back to whatever, in his case, nature, trees, inspired him, his source, in the Maori culture we call his terrain waiwa, his place to stand, where his spirit is, where his heart lies, where he connects. And from that, he's developed a vocabulary which is entirely his. It could be a sculptor, it could be his forms, but through the art process, he's developed that original vocabulary, which then becomes his paintings. Other artists have developed their own different vocabularies. Cézanne, distinctive, blocked out brush marks, almost sort of anticipating cubism in the way in which the patterns and the forms of the landscape were being separated into these blocks of paint. Matisse, with his paper cuts, these vast sheets of paper which he rolled up with paint and then cut out with scissors, and then created these wonderful kind of semi-abstract artworks on the wall, which are enormous when you see them. That's his vocabulary. He developed that from his own process of observation and development and thinking. Or in a three-dimensional version, Richard Serra with these vast steel sculptures, and very much his own kind of vocabulary. So then the next stage of the design process, you, having now developed the tools, the bricks, whatever you want to work with, as a designer, you now have something to work with. Now, if you hadn't done that, what would you now design with? What would be your vocabulary, your building blocks? You'd look around you, you'd find something which exists already there, and shuffle it and rearrange it and put it together in a more original form, because you haven't done the art process. So inevitably your work is going to be derivative. And sadly, I see a lot of designers like that, because they don't go through that initial art process to develop their own vocabulary, their own voice, and they just think, oh, I'm just a designer, I don't do that art stuff. I'll just work with design. So you just start to shuffle. So out of Mondrian's painting came Gerrit Rietveld's chair. Vocabulary, it wasn't the same artist in this case, but the vocabulary applied into design, into form, into furniture. And now we have computers. And the danger of the computer is that these things up here, all these different tool options that you've got, are the same everybody uses. And so if that's all you use, your work is all going to end up being fairly generic and fairly similar because you're starting with those same points. The computer is a tool, a way along the process. It is not the starting point of design, as so many people seem to think it is. So you have to start drawing through your own personal expression, your own observation, your own gestural marks, which no one else can make. If you make a mark on a piece of paper with a pencil like this, that is your body, your experience, all that's gone into your living has gone through that mark. No one else can do that. But the lines on the computer, anybody can do it because they're all using the same tools. So you have to do the development, the pattern making, the mark making directly, and then take that into the computer. Maybe scan it if you need to and take it into the computer. But I've tried and I cannot do these same curves if I go straight into the computer. And then the craft process is embodied knowledge. I used to do a lot of turning, and I can tell you how to turn a piece of wood. I can tell you put it on the lathe, you spin it, you hold the chisel, and you do this. You think, oh, I know how to do that. Do you how? It'll take you a long time and many disasters and quite scary moments when the wood bites you and jumps back at you when you get it wrong before you've learned. And because you've made those mistakes, the memory's embedded in your muscles. So when I'm turning and I'm getting near a point where I know I'm getting it's a bit dodgy, if I pull the chisel just too far, I know it's going to flick and get caught. My body's tingling, it's telling me don't do this. And that knowledge is built up through hundreds and thousands of repetitions of the same thing again and again and again. So I can tell you how to do it, but you can only learn it by doing it because it's embodied knowledge. It's in your body, it's not a rational thing up here. And it's also empathy with the material. The material leads you into what you can do. You can cut wood some ways and it'll cut beautifully, cut other ways it'll split and chip and break. So the understanding of the material again comes from repetition through doing it again and again and again, and that's through empathy. I tell a story. I've got some steps outside what used to be my little studio at home in my garden, and at night in the dark I would run down those steps and know exactly and hit the bottom and keep on going. But you ask me how many steps there are, I wouldn't know. My body knows. And I like to describe the craft sort of process like this, that we all use stone in some form, blocks, building blocks. If you're a writer, there'll be words. If you're a painter, there'll be paint marks. If you're a builder, there'll be stone, whatever. We all use these different components which we fit together to create this structure. And the beauty of the well-crafted structure is it can be no other way. You can't take this stone out and put it anywhere else. It will only fit there now. And the structure is strong because they only will fit there. And I think that's a really good metaphor of crafting, building beautifully strong structures with integrity with whatever building block you're using. So now that we've talked about this creative process, maybe we can understand a little bit more the difference between genuinely new and novel. I think an example of something that's genuinely new is Brancusi. This was probably made around about 1918, 1920. He was a sculptor who kind of was almost like a signpost at the beginning of modernism of the 20th century, pointing the way right through the century for a form of sculpture which strips it down to its essence. It takes away all the decorative, superficial surface stuff that had gone before and said, this is the essence of form. This is what sculpture is about. And he did this through his artistic process, but also because he was a superb craftsman. He came from Romania. He'd been brought up carving wood in the tradition in Romania, where they carve beautiful intricate posts for their houses and pieces for their furniture and so on. So the very strong craft tradition which he came from, he overlaid that with the avant-garde art tradition in Paris of the beginning of the 20th century, and produced these incredibly new, out of nowhere artworks. No one's anything like it before. Because he used his art process, he went back to scratch and developed it from there. Whereas the novel, knows nothing new, can only shuffle what's already there in an ironic, witty, clever dick way of doing it. And sadly, there's an awful lot of that kind of stuff around, because the people who are doing it don't understand the craft, the total process, and they're just trying to work as designers, and haven't been given the tools to generate their own vocabulary, their own stories to tell. And in particular, I think in London and Britain, I see a lot of this sort of clever dick stuff, and you forget about it in no time. There's nothing lasting in that. They're trying to attract attention through being different. And that is all because they use no left brain. Anything that you know that's new comes from your connection through the right brain. The left brain only knows what it already knows, so that's doing this shuffling. And so that kind of gives us the sort of situation of extreme problems where we have what I call art for art's sake. A typical example of Damien Hirst. When I was a kid, we used to have fairs where you'd have a little round turntable, you put a piece of paper on it, you drop some bolts of paint and the motor would switch it on, it would spin and it would make pretty patterns. Well, he's doing the same and calling it art. He makes a lot of money out of it. And that's the key. Or craft for craft's sake. I have no idea what this is. I photographed it in an American craft magazine. It's an example of incredible craftsmanship. The superb care and attention to detail and sound materials gone to making that. But what the hell for? What is it? Why? It's like throwing a dart at a dartboard, hitting the bull every time. Bang, 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 perfection. But why? What for? What's the point? It's craft for craft's sake. It's got no art process. There's nothing behind it. There's a bit of design, sure, in the layout of it, but there's no thinking behind it. It's just, I make because I can. Or similarly in the design world, I need to design a new sofa. How do I do that? What should I do that's sort of different? I know, some people are bigger than others. So if we have one back that's higher than the other, we can make a sofa that's a different size of people. Oh, aren't I clever? So I had this sort of eureka moment which brings this all together just a couple of years ago. So we've got this creative process I've been describing, and how important it is that we work through all these stages. We don't ghettoize ourselves into thinking that we're any one of these and limit what we do. Because that process is exactly the same as the way our brain works. The art process, the spherical connection, the intuitive feeling, the drawing in of new information, the design process, the art process. You think when you're creating, you sort of sit back and you think like this. The classic artist with his easel, he stands back and he's scratching his head and looking at it, or he goes in and he's painting like this, or you lean forward onto the drawing board of the computer and you're doing this. So you step back, you connect with the art process, you go forward, you go into the design process. Right brain, left brain. Absolutely classic examples of that. And this needs to be disconnected, because that's its strength, that's its power. And all the way along, I'm not at any point saying that left or right is good or bad. What I'm saying is we've got both, and they're both very powerful. And if we use both, we are very powerful. But currently we're not. So then you take the object and through your embodied, intuitive, instinctive knowledge that's built up in your body, you make it through the craft process. And there we have Getty to Ari, Getty to Artia, Getty to Ari, and Getty Aranui, the same three 3 is strong. 3 is a triangle. A balanced triangle like that is the strongest structure you can make. Anything else is weak. That is strong. And it keeps coming up again and again and again. So an example of limited thinking, of design thinking that's disconnected. Now this is one example. I've got another, which is a lines plan. This is kind of what I like to call the sort of the conceit of the designer, the hand of God looking down and creating a house or living space from above, making this sort of interesting sculptural form. Because the form is interesting. I mean, this is, it's a fascinating form to think of these 2 forms working together. There is stuff happening there which is fascinating. There's a house. What's going on inside? Or another example, and this was a very well covered, documented house that was built in Britain just quite recently. It had glass all around on the ground floor. The upper story had this roof, which is all these different planes of angles, which was, again, sculpturally quite interesting, quite fascinating. But, I mean, look, would you want to sleep in that bed with this sort of wall coming across at an angle like that? I don't believe particularly in feng shui, but there's a lot of common sense in feng shui about the feeling of spaces. And they would not have any of that. So what they've done when they designed this is they've sat there at a drawing board with their geometry and created sort of fascinating forms and lines and structures with no understanding of what's happening inside the spaces when you've created them. I used to do quite a bit of architecture in the 90s, and when I was designing a house, I would go on the site and I'd sit down and shut my eyes. And I'd essentially build that house in my head from inside out, because that's what we feel. These are the spaces we inhabit. This is what matters, not this geometry from the outside. So I start to think about, where's the sun rising, where are the views, where's the wind coming from, where's the drive coming from, where's the garden, where's the space we want to have, how are those spaces going to, all those kind of external things that sort of come in to meet at this point where nature interacts with the human environment. So the human is the intersection of those things. In those intersections, we create these spaces. And they start off as sort of nebulous forms. So we have a sort of neat sort of bits here, here like that, and here like that. And they just start with these clouds, these scribbles on paper like this. And gradually, these nebulous forms create a structure of their own, which starts to form out of that, coalesce out of that, and that becomes the house. So that's a feeling house. That's built as a space from inside, not an imposed conceit from outside. That is a right brain process, which is then smoothly moving into a left brain process as it starts to coalesce. It's a lovely quote I just discovered recently, which sort of describes that. It was in 1971. So the last section is history. I've been fascinated by the evolution, initially through the brain, as I've been talking about, and I'll talk a bit more about that, but also culture through our existence as humans. If you go right back to the beginning of the earliest, even before Homo sapiens, when we were apes living in the trees, we were connected to that environment totally. Every sound, every whisper in the trees, every movement of air meant something. We could read that, we could feel it, we knew what it meant, a change in the weather, an animal moving, all those noises and signs absolutely connected to us. We knew and we responded to them. Time wasn't like we know it as this linear thing. Time was cyclical. The only sense of time was with the day-night short rotation and the long rotation of the seasons, summer and winter. So time was cyclical. You come round again to where you started, you keep on getting round and round. So there's no sense of moving forward. They're constantly just in the same place. And because they're in the same place, all their ancestors were still there with them. They didn't leave them behind. The spirit world was full of all the people that had been there before them, because they were all going around together, all connected. Janine Bernice tells an amazing story in her book Biomimicry about monkeys in Africa. The scientists watching this tribe of monkeys, and there was a young one that got sick. And these animals are territorial, they stay within quite a small space and they don't move out of that. And this monkey got sick and suddenly it took off. And they followed it for miles and miles through the forest, way up into a completely different area. And it headed for this tree, and it climbed this tree, and it got a hold of a twig, and it very carefully pulled the bark off the twig and sucked the pith. And it got better. And scientists later analysed that and discovered that, yes, indeed, that twig did contain a medicine, and they knew what the sickness that the monkey had, and they never knew this was a medicine, it's Newton, but they discovered this was actually a cure for the sickness the monkey had. And the bark was poisonous. If eaten it, would have died. Now, how did it know? No one had told it. It was intuitive, it was so connected to its environment, it knew intuitively this is what it had to do. If you felt the same thing, would you run all the way and go and eat that thing? Because you felt that feeling, you think, well, hang on, how do I know it's okay? Your rational mind will kick in and say, oh no, I'm not so sure about that one, that's a bit silly, it's a bit wacky, come on, that can't be right. So we wouldn't do it. But at that point we were connected. And then two things happened at the same time. Our language started to evolve out of music, out of connection through music, which was mimicry of the sounds of the birds, the animals we heard around us. And we started to use tools. And fascinatingly, both of those things, those actions, are rooted in the same part of the left hemisphere. They both undergo the same process of grasping and controlling. If you name something, you can control it, you own it. If you grasp a tool, you can use it, you can manipulate it. So it's about manipulation, about control for my advantage. And this started to happen in the left brain. This was the beginning of consciousness, and this was the beginning of our separation from the environment. Because we now started to think rationally and to question that instinct to go and eat that twig. And so we started to become separated from the environment in a way that all the other animals were not. And Homo sapiens evolved in Africa, and it left very few people. Through genetic tracing, go right back through DNA, through peoples around the world. They've traced all of Homo sapiens, every single person, whether they're from New York or from some indigenous tribe that still lives in mud huts in Africa. They all come from a few people that left Africa about maybe 60,000 years ago. And they headed out through the Middle East, and they divided, and part went down the south coast of Asia, across Papua New Guinea into Australia, and they've been there ever since. And part moved north, and that also divided. Some of it went east into Asia, some of it west into Europe. And they arrived in Europe maybe about 50,000 years ago. And at the time, Neanderthal were there, and they'd been there for 250,000 years, probably. And they hadn't changed. They were still the same creatures, they never changed. That's why they died out. And Homo sapiens arrived then, and at that time Europe was a fairly similar sort of climate to what it is now. They very quickly descended into an ice age. And when the humans arrived, so far they've discovered no art that's from that time. The first art, which is some of the earliest, was discovered about 45,000 years ago, when the ice age started. So it would appear that art, for us, was a community bonding response to crisis. When things were okay, we didn't need it so much, but when things started to get rough, it brought us together as a community, created rituals, connections, stories, ways in which we used to bond together to survive the problems of the environment in which we were living. This was made, they reckon, about 40,000 years ago. And already there's a sense of ritual and magic coming in, because here's an animal and a human combined. It's carved from a mammoth tusk. And they reckon that probably this and carvings like this would have taken 400 hours to make, scratching the ivory with a stone very slowly. Why? Why would so much energy be expended on something like this? There's no way someone in that time could have done that in their idle moments. They must have been supported by their tribe to do it, so it must have been important for the people around them that they're doing this. It has a role, it has a reason. That was the beginning of art, and we have done it ever since. Why? "30,000 years ago, caves in Chauvet, amazing film that Werner Herzog made about these caves that you probably see that's going around at the moment. Imagine the achievement of this. We've got photographs now, we've got videos, we've got zoos, we can observe animals quite safely, quite close up. But even then, could you observe one and go away from memory and draw it? But they were observing it in the wild, where it was about to eat them if they got too close to it. They were scared of these things. They were moving fast, they were running. And then they memorized that line, they went back into the cave in the scary dark depths of the earth, with torchlight and maybe cave bears lurking down the way they didn't know, and they drew these incredibly lifelike, beautiful representations of these creatures. Why? "15,000 years later, the caves in Lascaux, also in France, the same thing. That art continued for 20,000 years, unbroken within those caves. In some caves, they can see that progression over that period of time. We've done it ever since. Art, as we know it, started with the Egyptians probably 5,000 years ago. So that sense of time is incredible. We've come from the Egyptians to where we are now in 5,000 years. They were doing this for 20, 30,000 years. This was discovered in Montastruc in southern France. They reckon it's made 13,000 years ago. It's also a carving from a mammoth tusk of 2 reindeer swimming across a river. Beautifully, closely observed. This is at the moment on show in the Science Museum in London. It's an incredible show of Ice Age art, and that line is also in that exhibition. Very precise observation. The lines of the females in the front, and you can tell it from certain angles you can see it's udder, and the state of its udder will tell you that it's autumn. Also, this is its coat, winter coat coming on, these shaggy lines of the new coat coming. The antler, the state of the male behind with its antlers, that also shows it's autumn. So very specific in its timing, its observation. Acute observation of how those reindeer swim across. You've seen photographs of them doing it now, and they do it exactly like that, one behind the other, almost touching, slipstreaming each other, the noses up in the air to breathe, their antlers hard down on their back behind them. Exquisitely observed nature. Why? No one really knows, so we're into speculative territory here. Anthropologists reckon that art developed, it was shamanism. They say that art for art's sake, as we've done it in the last 100 years, is only a very recent phenomenon. Up to that point, art had a reason, it was done for a reason, that it has to have a reason, and therefore the only reason they can think of is shamanism. It's part of a shamanic ritual. Maybe initially they thought it was a way of gaining magical control of the creatures so that they could hunt them and eat them. But then someone pointed out, well actually no, all the bones in these caves where these paintings are of different animals to the ones they're drawing, so that can't be so. But the scientists have this idea that it has to be for a reason. I kind of felt, well, as an artist, to me, I mean, my response to nature, whatever form it is wow. You know, I need to sort of recreate this in some way. I need to tell its story. It's so inspiring. It deeply touches me, and all my artists in some way trying to do that. So why can't these guys be doing the same sort of thing? A few really sensitive people who pick up on that nature are kind of responding to it. So why isn't this art maybe a sense of yearning for that past connection which we knew we once had and we no longer have? Like those monkeys that we once wear, that memory is maybe still with us. And in trying to depict nature in any form, we're trying to reconnect with it. And I discovered a book by Clayton Eshelman, who spent time in the caves up there. And he's come to the same conclusion. And he calls the cave art paintings postcards of nostalgia. There are a nostalgic yearning for that past which we see around us in the animals, in these reindeer. We see this incredible interaction with the environment, intuition and survival within the environment, so intuitively in touch with it, which we've lost. And these drawings of them are trying to recapture that lost connection to nature. And then as history goes on, this is coming back to Gilchrist now, he started looking at cultural history from the early Greeks onwards. And there's a very clear pendulum swing backwards and forwards over the last 3,000 years between left brain and left hemisphere and the right hemisphere influenced culture. So the early Greeks were very intuitive, very expressive, very feeling, very right hemisphere influenced. Later Greeks were more rational and scientific, and more left hemisphere influenced. The Renaissance was a flowering of connection to nature, of the beauty of nature, the beauty of natural love, of going out and dancing, dilly-dallying in the fields and the forests, and painting it and telling stories and singing songs about it. Followed by the Reformation, the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason, which was swinging violently back to the left brain, rational thinking, which has given us what we are now. The Romantic period, a brief period of right brain influence, and then the final triumph of the left, the Industrial Revolution and modernism. And you can depict those, the Age of Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, epitomized by Descartes, who gave us the Cartesian grid. Descartes talks about sitting in his study, watching the Parisians walk past his window outside on the street, thinking, I have no connection to these people, they mean nothing to me. All that matters is up here in my brain, what I think, that is what I am. And he gave us the Cartesian grid, the X, Y, Z axes, which are the basis of all our computer drawings. Reduced life down to reason and rationality. And then the Romantics opened it back out and connected to nature. I mean, look in that painting how small the figures are, how small the human buildings are in relation to the vast trees and the big sky and the space going through those trees into the sky beyond. This is insignificant human endeavour in this vast, more powerful nature. And then back to the grid, back to the cold, hard, personal lines of modernism, the rational thinking. And so throughout history, art has had these different roles. It's come and it's gone. You know, for some time, it's been used as a religious tool. For some time, it's been used for dogma, to stick up, to prop up dynasties, to promote dogma. It's currently being used more for commercialism, for advertising. But throughout all those stories, throughout all that history, art has remained a fundamental part of who we are. If it has survived for that long, it must be important. And when I say art, I'm talking about that whole creative process. I'm not sort of separating this out, it's creativity. It's a part of our culture. It's vital to us expressing who we are and communicating through rituals, through coming together in communities, through rituals, various artistic rituals, even like this. It's part of what we are. It's not some little peripheral indulgence that's sidelined into a few sort of flaky, arty-farty sort of people who do this. It's not really important. You know, it's got to be important if it survived that long. And I believe that it survived that long because it's our yearning to connect to nature. And if you, apart from the political and the religious dogmatic kind of art, if you look through the history of art, almost all of it is derived from nature in some form or other. The great cathedrals of the Gothic period were forests recreated. The patterns of wallpaper of flowers and twining creepers, jewellery, whatever we do, you can trace most of it in some form back to nature. all our screensavers we have on our computers, or beautiful mountain views, or skiing in the mountains, or whatever, it's all back to nature. We still have that yearning. It's fundamental to what we are. It's even been proved that if you are in contact with nature, even if it's a tree like this, it's minimal, but it helps. If you're in contact with nature, you're more community-minded, you're more connected to the people around you, you are happier and you are more prosperous. If you're not, you're more self-centered. Wealth, fame, get ahead of yourself at the expense of others becomes the goal, which is what happens in cities when we're disconnected from the natural environment. So art of the 20th century was highly left-brain influenced. It was disconnected, clever dick stuff, which at its time had its value, and it was an important part of our culture and our progression. But we have to see it for what it is, as being this investigation of how far can you experiment with the art process through a left-brain sort of process and learn from that. But it's a very strong swing of the pendulum to the right. There is no feeling, there's no kind of sense of connection of storytelling or anything in this. This is an idea which he had, and then someone else made it. So okay, you can still get that craft process through someone else, but it's a mechanized machine type craft process that makes this. There's no hand of the maker gone into this. There's no care. It's exactly trying to reproduce by machine a balloon which is made into a dog, and it's all about fame and money. Whereas there are other art processes which are quite different. The Aboriginal artists from Australia, and you will see their work in the major galleries in New York, Paris, and London. They are important, and they do it like this. They do it together, sitting around in little skyline garages in Australia, or out in the bush, out in the open, chatting happily together, doing these paintings, usually on the floor, in groups, and often women doing it. And I think the most powerful ones are the ones done by the women. And this is Dorothy Mapangadi, who I think is one of the most important, amazing artists that are working now. The women used not to paint. People weren't allowed. Their art was mainly confined to the body. And as you probably know, in the history of Australia, the ancestors created the land in the dreaming. As they moved across the land, they actually created it as they travelled. And as they travelled, they stopped, and there were events along the way. They stopped where they stopped to have a break and had to eat something, where they slept, where they had a piss. All these things happened along the way, and they're all remembered in the dreaming. And the dreaming will travel from one side of Australia to the other. And different tribes along the way will remember different parts of that dreaming in different languages, but they'll get together and they'll rebuild that whole dreaming every so often. They'll remember it, because it's been passed down orally through all those 40,000 years of living there. And Dorothy Mapangadi used to paint, sorry, I was talking about the women's art. So they would go out and they go to some of these sacred sites where the ancestors had stopped along the way, and then they remembered them. And they'd make cuts in their bodies, and they'd take the earth from this sacred site, which was imbued with the essence of the ancestor. And they'd place it in their cut, and they'd create these cicatrices, which built up like wells in their body, and they create patterns like this. So this was art on their body, with the land, with the essence of the ancestors. The body was the land, was the art. So when they started painting, only in the last 10 years, they carried on that tradition, that connection to the land, that expression of the land, that feeling for the land. Dorothy Mapangadi started painting bush yam patterns, beautifully patterned, colourful paintings of the intricate pattern of the bush yams growing out on the sand. And then, when she was about 40, she was taken by her whānau, her tribe, back to her ancestral spot, and she was inducted into the dreaming, into her stories. At that point, her art took on a greater responsibility. She now had to tell her stories of the dream. And instantly the art changed. It became like this, these monochrome patterned paintings which were much more abstract, but were deeply felt and descriptive of her dreaming of the places which her ancestors had passed across. These are the salt flats of Binamina. And you can imagine her sitting there in sort of meditative trance state with a pot of paint and a brush going, paint, pot, pot, paint, 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 pot, paint, 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 paint. And build up these long lines and these dots, which are all slowly diminishing groups of 5 or 8. Coming from this rhythm, coming from this meditative state, which connects her back to the land, to the history, to her ancestors, which tells that story, coming through her, through that body, through that whole culture that's been there for 40,000 years. That painting an expression of all that. There's no skittish left brain getting in there saying, hang on, what do we do? What are we going to do next? Why are we going to go here or there? What do we do? That's all shut down. And in that rhythmic state, the right brain is just allowed to rhythmically paint. I've watched a movie of Giacometti painting, a portrait of a face. The same thing, that same very definable rhythm of paint and the brushstrokes, just keep on going to this rhythm. Van Gogh said the brushstrokes come in staccato bursts of 6 or 8 at a time, without fail. It's there in all of them. It's that connection, that feeling, that rhythm, which is all imbued in the body. It's all that right brain process. Another art of the 21st century, like Ai Weiwei, this is the installation he did at the Turbine Hall in the Tate Modern in London. These are tiny little melon seeds, which were made out of clay in a small town in China. And hundreds of people in China spent, I think, several years hand making and painting these little melon seeds. So there were millions of them on the floor of this vast turbine hall, and people scrunched and walked across them until the dust started to become too toxic and they stopped it. So this isn't the kind of superficial, decorative, fancy pizzazz of Jeff Koons. This is a whole village of people as a community, through lots of painstaking, handmade marks, building up this artwork together. This is the feeling, this is the art of the 21st century. This is the balanced work of the left and the right brain process working together. Now that would all be very, very well if that was just talking about the creative process. I mean, I think that is absolutely vital, it's really important, and we understand it. And I hope that by understanding that process, you can now control it. If you don't, it will control you. Your left brain will come in quickly. Because if you're presented with a problem, your left brain will jump in there like that. I know the answer, bang, bang, bang. This is the way you do it. And if you follow that, you'll come up with a left brain solution. And it will be a short-term, disconnected, probably derivative rearranging sort of thing. The right brain takes longer. The right brain needs time for the left brain to shut up and get out of the way, to sort of slowly settle and reflect and think. And you have to allow that to happen. And then you start to create something which feels right. It's not pretty lines on a piece of paper, but something that has feeling. Whether it's designing a room or a house or a painting or a meal, or whatever we do, if you use that process, you will create work which has feeling in some form. It will be designed with feeling, not with cleverness. Now that, in a way, it almost stopped there, but there's one finale to that which is vital. And that is that because we're disconnected to the planet, we're destroying it. Now, unless we reconnect, we're going to destroy our habitat, our culture, and our lifestyle. These are birds on Midway Island in the middle of the Pacific, thousands of miles from any other land. Their parents go out and they try and get food for their chicks, which are born on the atoll. And all they can see are bits of plastic floating on the surface, and they pick them up and bring them back and feed to the chick, which dies because its stomach's full of plastic. And there are hundreds of these, and that's photographed exactly as it was found, of these dead chicks with their stomachs full of bright coloured bits of plastic. That's the extent of our reach on this planet through not caring. Now, every one of us here saw that, I'm sure, absolutely cares. But the problem is that's disconnected. You know, our left brain existence here is excluded from that because it's disconnected to that. If we can regain to connection to that, we can start caring about that. Maybe we can turn our culture, our civilization around and start caring about the environment which we're destroying and so preserve our culture. And we can only do that through connection, through empathy, through caring. And if we don't do that, we're going to destroy the human culture as we know it. So it's not just about creating nice spaces, about creating art, about creating culture. It has become essential for our survival. Thank you.
Thank you,
Let's
David.
all carve reindeer.
Yeah. Thank you, David. So just in the interest of time, David has a taxi in about half an hour's time. So what I'd like to do is, if we could just take maybe 3 questions, and then once we're done with those questions, we can just move next door and have another drink or 2, and have a little bit of conversation. If you want to ask something else, then we can do that. So, are there any questions?
I'll go first, David, because your spectrum ranging from art through to craft resonated with me, and I tend to come more from the craft side, the creation side of things, and I'm interested in trying to integrate with the art as it travels through that journey. And I'm looking at the students here or around the room, and to me, I would perceive it that art is a function of life experience. Fair?
Yeah.
Would that be your opinion? How do you then guide young students who, how do they get in touch with that art, especially if maybe they don't have 40, 50 years of life experience to touch into it?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be prolonged experience. It's just the nature of the experience. So I love that word Taranawaiwai. It's a Maori word that is rather crudely interpreted as a place to stand. So in my Western world, in my understanding of it, it's a place where I go in which I can find connection and inspiration. For me, it's nature. It doesn't have to be. It could be whatever inspires you as a creative artist. You have to find that place. You then have to work from it. You then have to immerse yourself in it, take it on board, feel it, experience it, find ways to express it, articulate it, gradually through, like Monjo, and it won't happen initially. You have to work it bit by bit through your observations, your connections, your feeling for it. You start to express your feelings for it and create your vocabulary, which comes out of that, which is now what you use to design with. And in the Maori world, Taranawaiwai is ancestral. It's the place where they were born, it's the place where they will die, and their ancestors are there with them as well, in that sort of psychical sense. That's a part, they're imbued with their power of their ancestors. And interestingly, in the Maori world, artists don't choose to be artists, but they inherit it. It goes right back through their whakapapa, because it comes from the gods. So that's how I would describe that process. I think that's really, really important that you do that. And it doesn't have to be any one thing, but it's that process you have to go through.
Yep.
Do I understand you correctly if I say that you are saying that we need to create spaces, not only in the sense of a room or a building, but also space in the meaning of allowing people to get creative, to give them the time and whatever it needs, whatever it will take, to make them actually, to allow them to get creative, to get reconnected with nature, and therefore actually recreate or reinvent creativism.
I've essentially sort of thrown you the tools. I mean, how you direct that, it could be in any number of ways of creative endeavor. And yes, absolutely, it's not just about the space, it's how you then orchestrate the way that people interact with that space and within each other within that space, and that's all part of that same thinking. But it's not that. So the thing about the brains is it's not what you think, it's the way you think. That's the difference. I mean, both brains think the same sort of things, but they both think those things in a different way. So it's stopping us doing that sort of very linear, rational way of thinking about any of these issues, and disengaging and just taking the bigger picture and thinking about it differently in everything we do. That will change our culture, and it will happen not through anybody telling us what to do from above, any dictates or laws or directions. It will happen because we're doing it. It's the zeitgeist. That's what I believe. And I see it happening. I see it happening in what artists are doing around the world now. In sort of a lot of artistic events, community events, getting people together to do things together in the cities. And, art like Weiwei's art, all that kind of beautifully expressed work that involves countless hours of painstaking work that's coming from the body. It's quite a different sort of art to the grandiose ecclesiastical art of the monks.
One final question?
I just want to ask, how do you navigate that level of disconnect in the city?
Run.
Yeah, I'm going to remember that for the 7 years I've been living in the city.
I can't handle it. That's why I live in Spain. My sort of motto of cities. I mean, I travel a lot and I go to big cities, and my motto is charge in, charge up, and charge out.
So, David, just before you do run in about 20 minutes' time, I'd just like to take the opportunity to just thank you again for the time and the energy that you've put into this, and for coming up here and talking to us this evening. On behalf of both Unitec and Generator, really, really appreciate it. So, thank you very much.